Flawedcast, episode 108, when an unmovable object meets an unstoppable force. Spirituality isn't some quaint stepchild of an intelligent worldview or only option for those of us not smart enough to understand the facts of the world. Spirituality reflects the most sophisticated mindset and the most powerful force available for the transformation of human suffering. Marianne Williamson.
Flawedcast. Get in the arena.
Good morning, Flawedcast Nation. How is everyone doing? Want to welcome everyone. We had to take a week off because, you know what? We just needed it. And I am back, as always, with my good buddy, my right-hand man, Carl Tuckerson. How art thou?
I am great. I would recommend everyone do what we did last week periodically, because the more I read, the more I see, the more I learn, the more I grow, the tougher it gets at times to keep plowing through what you're seeing and what you're dealing with. And I do think sometimes that you can get so, for lack of better words, pissed off. I don't even want to sugarcoat it anymore. But I think
like you ever did.
Yeah, right. Right. But I think you can get so angry and so like, what is your problem? To the people that are looking at something and calling it something else, that at times to maintain, you must step back. And so last week, there was no podcast, but there was a recharge and a reboot, and it was good. I enjoyed it. But how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Actually, I think the recharge and reboot is going to be evident in today's episode, which I'm super excited about. Carl's going to take the helm, and then I think we have some good things on the horizon. So those are you who mindful of what God's doing, who are in love with history and passion of things and men and women of the past. I think you're going to like what we have coming up on the horizon. But let's get the shake and howdy out of the way. We are everywhere you can listen to podcasts, Flawedcast CLE. We're on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Breaker. We are on Rumble. We're on YouTube. Oh, by the way, here's a fun news item for you, Carl. Episode 106 was permanently deleted from YouTube because of violated community guidelines. So you can
What was the topic of that? I don't remember. It was only, two?
It was one episode ago. So that was episode 106. Is the propaganda working?
Wow, I must have done a great job with you. I'm pretty much, for those that don't know, I do think a lot of times I'm personally responsible for the boot, because when I was guesting on your podcast, it was like I would show up, and then 2 weeks later, Bill's like, so we're off Facebook, or we're off YouTube, or we're off, and I'm like, okay, and it'd be another month, and then I'd show up again, and it was like, get rid of Carl.
Our good luck charm.
So it proves that the propaganda is working.
It is working, yes.
If it wasn't, we would have been on. So by taking us off, they verified exactly what we said.
Yes. Well, in agreement with that, I would say, if the truth wasn't working, the propaganda wouldn't be so vigorous. So keep that in mind. But I did want to let everybody know that you can listen to that whole episode, 106, Is the Propaganda Working, on Rumble. We're on Flawed Inc. And please check us out there. Please subscribe there. Subscribe where you can listen to podcasts, with this whole Neil Young, Joe Rogan debacle. I'm thinking it's just a matter of time before what universally was held as a platform of free thought, which is the podcast format, is going to start to become even more censored. So it's important that you find these platforms where you can listen to truth, and you can listen to people that aren't ashamed and feckless like most of the leaders in America, be it political or spiritual, to tell the truth. So
yeah, generally speaking, the beginning of podcasting and Facebook, it wasn't for information source. It was an idea source.
Yeah.
So somehow things have shifted into the fact that if I give you an idea, that has to be information, and that information has to be correct. The whole concept is groundless right from the beginning, but because of the moronic people that we live with day in and day out about everywhere we go now, and that I'm surrounded with, they don't even get the concept that it's misinformation. How about I don't want to even be viewed as a guy that gives information or opinion? How about I just generate ideas, which is called free thinking? How about that?
Well, you're a thought criminal. Well, I should say we. There's no I in team, but there is an a-hole. So, nonetheless, you can find us on the Project Mockingbird social media as of right now: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Flawed Inc. Check us out on Getter. Check us out on Gab. Starting to grow on those platforms. Really like them. We are on Parler, Flawed Inc. Please get a copy of my book, Smith, Heart of Man, Repair Manual. I just had some feedback from an old friend of mine this week who had picked up a while ago and really liked it. So, big shout out to my buddy Nick. Thank you, brother. And if you are interested, the link is below. So please get that, and it'll help my dog eat and help me prepare for my forthcoming wedding. But with that being said, Mr. Carl, lead us into the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, everyone, place your right hand over your left heart and repeat after us. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For all.
For all. All. So I'm really excited. This is another Carl exclusive, and for those who would recognize the title, when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, we're going to be talking about Newtonian physics and the spiritual connection between them. Which there's a spiritual connection between everything, folks, because God created it. So everything in the physical world was thought of, spoken into existence from the Almighty. But I just want to share a real quick blurb I found in regards to when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. It says, scientifically speaking, an unstoppable force and an immovable object are basically the same thing. Objects that no outside force can have an effect on, or at least in terms of changing their movement. So if two such objects were to intersect with one another, they would both be unable to affect the other's momentum or lack thereof, and would pass through each other. So I just, that I first heard that saying in The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan, Christian Bale take on Batman. I just thought I'd throw that in there for those that didn't know. But Mr. Tuckerson, grip and rip it, brother.
So this podcast generated the origin between a meeting that I had with my son and I. Now, this is something, thank God, that he was open to, which is a once-a-week evening meeting where he allows me to just simply, as a father, invest in him. And I would recommend, Bill, that every father take time right now to invest specifically and individually in your sons, because I still believe that men lead. I'm sorry, that isn't sexist. That isn't meant to be sexist. I know the intent of my heart. Men lead. And I would say that we can counter the attack on our children and on our sons if we invest to offset that attack.
I agree.
Okay?
Yeah.
So I was meeting with him, and we were going over the affairs of our time in society. Okay?
That's a very gentlemanly way to put that.
Yeah. What is happening now? And so I was showing him on the top secret board that I have with my resources all of the institutions and organizations that are recognized for specific responsibilities. Okay?
Such as?
In the world. Well, political. Okay. I showed him that the political system has become hijacked. It is no longer a system of politics. Okay? That's gone. It has been hijacked by evil people to implement their evil desires. And there is us, the rest of us, who are nothing more than a pawn on what they call a political chessboard. And I was showing him that. I was showing him the banking institutions. I was showing him the health institutions. Okay.
Wow, now you went full barrel on them, or both barrel on them.
Yeah. These are supposed to be 1 hour meetings that we do, but we're going to have to start moving to twice a week because his thirst for knowledge, thank God, must have been imputed to him genetically by God through his birth of being my son. So I thank God for that, but he is a future leader. I'm not just claiming that, but I'm investing in that.
Well, I would say that is certainly the case. And I would say I had the pleasure of meeting him this week. And I did
not even know that. He didn't tell me.
Yes, and he should be thankful he looks like his mother.
Yeah, he's a very good-looking young man.
So, but
that is true.
But I would say this is a good problem to have, spending more time with your son, pouring into him, helping to shape and mold him. So I think that's probably a good problem to have in lieu of other problems that could arise.
Yeah, and so exactly, I agree. And so we went probably for an hour and a half, questions, videos of watching, literature, websites. Everything is out there if people will put the effort. It's there. So in, I would say, an hour and a half, I saw an overwhelming look. Mm-hmm. I did. I saw an overwhelming look hit him, and I was like, dude, I recognize that look.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
That's me looking in the mirror. That's me seeing what I look at sometimes, and I'm like, welcome to reality. And I told him, I said, hey, did you know that there's a city called Realville and that your dad's the mayor? And he started laughing hysterically because he said, yeah. So what we did was I said, let's take a step back. We got to take a step back. This is too much. I said, it's too big and it's too complex. And he agreed. And I said, let's do what I rule my life by, and you know that, LCD.
Lowest common denominator.
Lowest common denominator. Let's strip this down, and let's get it to the proper perspective. And after we were done together stripping down every organization, every system, every effect that has, and what it's doing, we came down to two categories. And it's a lot easier to deal with two categories than it is to deal with what we were dealing with,
Right.
And the two categories that we came down to were evil and good. And that was it.
Yeah.
And the way we defined that was not what the people tell you they intend to do, not what the people tell you is the reason why they are doing something. We looked at the results. We looked at the results of everything that I was showing him, and we concluded in categories with two categories, good and evil. And the definition of good, we made positive and helpful and healthy impact on humanity. Okay?
Yes.
Positive, helpful impact on humanity. And evil was negative and harmful and hurtful impact on society, on people.
As you're saying that, and I apologize, I forget the address, but there's a scripture that talks about faith and works. And to paraphrase, it basically says, you tell me about your faith and I'll show you my works. And I've been having this conversation with a good friend of mine, and when Jesus talks about you can judge a tree by its fruit. An apple tree is never going to have oranges come from it. It isn't. But an apple tree will have, I love Honeycrisp. I love in the autumn going and picking Honeycrisp. But you can see on those trees what is eatable, enjoyable, delicious, worthy to bake with, just grab it and bite, have at it, versus what there's worms and just decay and rot. So if I may, and if I'm out of order, then tell me, but I would say it's kind of what you're talking about. The lowest common denominator is looking at that tree. Is that tree bearing good, usable fruit to better mankind, like you're saying, nourishment? Or is this decay? Is it rot? Is it not bringing the goodness that it was designed and created to?
That's true. That's a beautiful picture. And so I left that meeting with an open door to the next one to pick up and resume that conversation. But we wanted to strip down in society what is happening right now. And what is happening is being disguised in names. It's being disguised in the name of health emergency. It's being disguised in the name of politics. They're disguising themselves in the names of Republicans and Democrats. Things are being disguised in the names of liberals and conservatives. It's being disguised in the names of Christianity and atheism. There's all these terms and there's all these disguises that are being laid out. And the reason is because the more disguises you have, the more people you appeal to.
Right.
Okay? So that's why. And so we wanted to break it down into the evil and good. And what I decided to do was I decided to look because I'm sensing forces against me that I can't see. Resistances against me that I can't see, but I know that it's there. I feel it in the atmosphere. I feel it in my spirit. I feel things differently in my spirit, Bill, than I did 3, 4, 5 years ago. There is an intensive evilness that I feel, but I can't see, okay? But I am seeing it demonstrated through people in these organizations and in these systems. They are demonstrating through their characteristics and through the effects of what is happening. Evil is manifesting itself, so I can see it. But even beyond that, I feel in my spirit and in the atmosphere that I am living in this society, evil. An intense evil. And it's a force.
I think, respectfully, really, I mean this respectfully, I know people that wouldn't necessarily darken the halls of a church, but I can tell you I've had deep conversations about this and their acuity in regards to sensing lowest common denominator, good and evil, using your what we're going to just stick with for this episode. Their acuity to discern between the two is like off the charts. When I know, and I know you do too, people who are leaders in those faith communities that just haven't a clue.
And I think you're right about that.
And I say that not necessarily to offend for offense sake, but I say that to drive a point home. God speaks to whomever. However, it isn't whomever is listening. It's who is listening. And that's how I would determine that. I would decipher that. And I think it's important. And I don't mean to interrupt you, but I'm so excited to listen to what you're about to get into. But I think that distinction needs to be made. And I think it's something that I know, at least since the calendar of 2021 to 2022 is turned, we've been really trying to drive this home that these idioms or these ideologies or these labels or whatever you want to ascribe on yourself or put onto other people are really divisive, and they really don't mean a whole hill of beans. It is the tree that you are observing bearing good fruit or bad fruit?
It's a great point. I think I'm going to prove why this is happening. And the funny thing is, I could prove it with the Bible, but you'd have to believe the Bible.
Sure.
For me to prove it. So I'd rather use Newtonian laws of physics and force, because I believe everyone knows who Sir Isaac Newton is, and I believe everyone knows that one day an apple supposedly fell and hit him in the head under a tree. That's the way the story goes, and all of a sudden
he invented gravity.
Yeah, okay. So what blew me away as I dove down this hole was the parallel between force as defined by Newton and the way spiritual relationship with Jesus works. And if you don't mind, I'm going to dive into it.
I've been anticipating this all week.
The definition of force by Newton himself is strength or energy applied towards any object for physical action or physical movement, any movement at all. It's strength or energy that is applied towards any object for physical action. A force is a push or a pull resulting due to and this is the beauty, the force is due to interaction between two objects. So there must be an interaction between two objects for force to exist. That is how force happens. That is how force is Newtonianly explained and defined.
Yeah.
So interaction. Then I decided to go a little farther, and I realized that there are two defined forces, two different kinds of forces. One of those forces is contact force. Okay?
Okay.
The other one is called at a distance force. No contact.
Okay.
A couple examples real quick. Friction would be considered a contact force because two objects touching each other, rubbing against each other creates what?
Friction.
There you go.
Okay.
Tension force, contact between two forces. Normal force, air resistance force. Two objects interacting with each other. Okay? But the one that I want to talk about is action at a distance, meaning no physical contact necessary for force to be generated, right? Doesn't mean that there isn't an interaction between two objects. It means there is no physical interaction, no touching. And one of the greatest, obviously, examples of that would be gravitational force. Whatever goes up must
come down.
There you go. But you're not literally touching, you're not literally physically contacting. The planets within our solar system are very far away. Earth is very far and distant. There is no physical contact in our solar system, right? But gravity exists because it's recognized as a non-contact force. So I was saying evil force, good force, right?
Yes.
Newton defines what force is. It is the push or energy between two objects as a result of interaction between those two objects, right?
Yes.
Would you like to say anything at this point? Because I see your wheels just spinning.
No, I love when you do these kind of things, and...
Well, yeah, because you had no idea what was coming your way, and it's always fun when you have an open forum, open thought, in the moment discussion.
The one thing that was overriding as you're talking is, the basics of Newtonian physics are still applied and used today. And they're eternal principles that are ever unchanging, much like the spiritual principles and the underlying guidelines of the kingdom of heaven are. That's just another parallel that I'm drawing from what you're saying. But please continue. This is really fascinating.
We established that to show this. In other words, I laid that and we could talk about this for 10 podcasts, but we're not physics. This is elementary stuff, okay? Yeah. So, but the one that blew me away is we've talked about contact force, right? Touching it physically. At a distance force, no physical contact, but that force is real. The one that blew me away was electrical force. And the reason that one blew me away is because that force exists in those two capacities. It means this. As I sit at the headquarters here and look at your outlets in this beautiful facility,
thank you.
There is power in your electrical outlets, but it's housed. So at this time, that power sits there, and there's no contact. I'm at a distance, right? But that power is there. So at this time, that electrical power is at a distance from me. But if I decide to get up, which I'm not, and I decide to take a bobby pin, and I decide to make physical contact with that force, I will find out very quickly that that force, even though before I did that, had no signs that it was there. That force had no evidence to me. It was just a beautiful electrical outlet cover that sat there with nothing plugged in it, and I would never know that force is there, but it is there. It's at a distance, and it is housed, and it is real. But when I tap into that, when I walk over to that and interact with that, I will find out very quickly that that force that didn't show itself to me a couple of minutes ago will very quickly prove to me that that force became a contact force because I decided to interact with that. And so that concept, when I realized that it can switch between at a distance and contact in a moment, in just a millisecond, it can be involved in my life in a really bad way. That is what I feel is happening spiritually. I feel that because, and I'm going to tell you this, I take personal responsibility for some of what is happening in this world with evil. I will be the sheep that lays himself down to say, it's my fault. And you want to know why? Because force only happens for the good when you interact with God.
As you were saying that, with that analogy in regards to, putting the bobby pins, which, by the way, don't do. A disclaimer.
Oh, yeah, please do not do that.
Please. However, and I'm glad that you kind of just put a period on that sentence in regards to the formulation or the process in regards to speaking to the Almighty and dealing with Him in that regard. Just as it is destructive when you do it the improper way, like you could get electrocuted, my house could get burnt down, Shandy something bad could happen to her, which would be the worst of all. There's also, however, the proper way to do things, meaning right now, the computer is plugged in to that same socket that we're able to record. And if you are accessing that, I'll say that source, if that's okay to you, or that force, in the proper way, the proper manner, there are great things that can be accomplished and great things that can happen. And it reminds me of another Newtonian principle, which is for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And how these two principles, as I'm listening to you, are completely intertwined, which is the basis of all Newtonian physics, right?
That's correct. So, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm digging where you're going with this, and I think this is a good kind of a bridge, I would say, like you in regards to conducting what is physically going on, and I would say the natural with what is happening kind of behind the scenes, and I'd say the supernatural.
That is correct. And I know for a fact that you're very well versed and studied in lot of not a lot of things, but I will say specific things. But one of the things that I would even like you, and again, you didn't research, so this is going to have to just come to your mind, but I feel we need to go with this.
That's right.
Is that I had said that the only way force exists is between interactions of two objects. And Newton goes on to explain that at the moment that the interaction between two objects cease, the force generated from that ends. Okay, are you with me? Mm-hmm. Now, we have this thing that force creates, and it's called momentum.
Okay.
So when you're interacting with something, you're generating force. When you stop interacting with that object, the force stops, but because of momentum, there is still movement. So it's a deception thing. Where you think that the force is still there because you have some momentum. Okay? But I think that what has happened in the church, in my opinion, I grew up in it, is that there were many, many, many years ago proper interaction between God and his children. And it was called intimacy. It wasn't called rules. It's amazing that Christians today can think that rules or law in church generates force, but God's word says that, behold, I stand at the door and knock. And of course, he's a gentleman. Right? And if any man chooses to open the door, if you allow me in, then I will come in, and what will he do? Sup with you. Now, that word sup illustrates a deep, intimate relationship. And what does that mean? It's not physical. It's the acknowledgement of who Jesus is and what Jesus did for you. It's the acknowledgement of how much he loved you and he laid his life down for you. It's the acknowledgement that Jesus knows what's best for you, and he wants what's best for you. And finally, he is able to be interactive in your life and generate good forces for you through him to give you what he knows is best and what he wants for you that is best. No other thing or force can know what's best for you, can want what's best for you, and can give you what's best for you. And because of those things and those reasons, I love Jesus. I interact with him. So in my life, because I have interaction with him, he gives me what I need to live my life, not at what is good, but what's best. That is how he answers questions. If I say to you, Bill, am I allowed to drink whiskey? Well, that's not even the real question. If I say to you, can I go to the titty bars? Well, that's not even, from Jesus's perspective, he's not concerned with laws and rules because he always takes an approach in dealing with you that says, I am not worried about what's right and wrong because my motivation for you is what's best. It's always that question with him. It is never what can I do and get away with. It's never what can I not do. That's where Christianity has shifted. It's impotent. It has no power for good. It is no good force because it's laws and it's rules and it's systems of men and it is people that are bound in tradition. And all that does is really, Bill, it says, what can I do? What can I not do? Right. What can I get away with? What can I not get away with? And Jesus is sitting there the whole time saying, why are you even asking me those questions? Because my desire for you is not what's good. It's not what's acceptable. It is what is best.
Wow. You're not asking me anything yet that I'm aware of, but what I would say...
Oh, I'm going to.
I know, but I just want to preface this because this is a sticking point for me. When you say best, I think if I may clarify, you're not talking about God's going to give you like a $5,000 pair of tennis shoes and like a Rolls Royce with a 24 karat gold hood ornament.
I am so glad you asked me that.
I think a clear distinction needs to be made, and this is part of my big issue with where we're at with this American gospel. Christ is concerned about what is best for your soul, what is best for the eternal element that he has breathed his breath, his divine breath into each and every one of us. He is concerned about that portion, that nugget, that element, whatever you want to call it, within us that touches the divine, that gives us access, not just the spirit or the natural realm, but the supernatural realm. All these temporal things, like God owns everything. He could, if he wanted to give Carl a $5 million mansion, he really could. The point I'm bringing is I believe when you say best, he is referring to, Carl, that is the best for me spiritually, that I embrace his teachings, that I walk as best as you can according to his precepts. You're not talking about material or temporal best. Correct?
Thank God you did that. You know what's funny is that's exactly where I was going to go with this thing before I asked you the question.
I love when
it's
we're
amazing.
simpatico. I love
because
that.
Jesus is eternal. Every thought that he has, every emotion that he has, every desire that he has, every movement and interaction with us is based and bound and formulated and genocided from eternity. And you are so right, because we are trapped in this body and we are trapped in this world here, and we're living life with a spirit that is housed in this body that is material, that is fleshly, and that is here in society. And so when I say what is best, according to his word, his deepest concern for you is where will you spend eternity. Yep. That is how he deals with what is best. And so you're right, Bill. He could literally if God so choose, and if Jesus so chooses, they could give me the wealth of this world. But the reality is that to me means nothing. It's so irrelevant. But and it means nothing to him,
Right.
because he owns everything anyway.
Well, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world yet forfeit his soul?
And that is the eternal teaching concept of what I say when I say what is best. So the question is, and let's just use this, okay, because it will be accepted by a lot of people, is if I could go to the strip clubs and still be a Christian, if I could smoke weed and still be a Christian. Now, you won't hear this from the pulpit, which is confusing, because if I was behind the pulpit, you would hear it, because it is relative to what people that are in the church are dealing with every day. So pastors have their flock for 40 minutes, maybe, sometimes 30, to listen to him, and then throughout the week they're on their own living their life in society. But in society they are bombarded by these questions and these issues. Is that what can I do in society to exist here and still be called a Christian? Well, Jesus is saying, any answer that I give you, any direction that I give you, that is going to be what is best for you to make sure that your spirit is with me for eternity in heaven. And that is how he answers questions.
I have a newer but a good friend, and if he's listening, Kyle, thank you for mentioning this a couple weeks ago. We had a conversation, but he said, the 3 things you're not going to hear people talk about in church are sex, the proper usage of money, and gluttony, food. And I think the point you bring up is absolutely right. These topics need to be discussed, and I think that's where a lot of people have lost their way and have been confounded, dumbfounded, and just want to give up with the whole pursuit of the kingdom of God. Now, for me, in regards to what you're saying, and I'll use myself as an example, I thoroughly enjoy a good cigar. The only other thing on a natural sense that gives me as much joy and satisfaction, just on a natural sense, is going to a record store and just like finding a really good record and just enjoying and listening. And I enjoy a good cigar. And when I have a good cigar, I do like to have a nice whiskey. What I can say is, and I've heard these arguments before, and I think to prioritize, is this going to affect my position with Christ in regards to eternity? Or I would even add, in regards to his purpose and fulfilling that in my life while I'm here.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, they don't, for me. And I'm going to tell you why. Because it goes back to this, you talk about intimacy. You also talk about relationships. I am not, but when I get married, I will be intimate with my wife. Mm-hmm. And I'm not trying to be away, but when you talk about intimacy in regards to your relationship with Christ, it is allowing him access. Like, my fiance knows me better in ways than nobody else in the world does. And it's the same thing with Christ. It's allowing him access to that part in you, that where he created that, you said the word sup, I just say where he wants to hang out, mm-hmm. where he wants to spend time. And I have other friends that are recovering alcoholics, and for them, that is sin. It talks in James 4 to know what is right and to do that and not do that is called sin. What I can say is that my relationship isn't impeded at all with having a cigar and a cup of whiskey, or a glass whiskey, sorry. But what I can also say is that for some people that have substance abuse issues, that absolutely is. All in all, when it boils everything down to it, is what you're saying, and even the whole idea of Christ knocking on the door and opening is a result of Newtonian physics. It's force being exhibited, and then hopefully opening that door is force being exchanged.
Yeah, the interaction between 2 objects.
Exactly.
Which it doesn't matter what those objects are.
Exactly.
It would be a non-contact object sitting on the other side of the door until you decide to open the door and make contact. And right. You make that choice. What's happened today with the church is, I believe that not only have we lost our force because of lack of relationship and interaction, and we know that the only way force exists is the interaction between 2 objects, not rules, is that for a while I think the church had momentum, meaning that because there was true teaching and living on intimacy and not just rules, and then this battle of society pulling you away and the world pulling you away day for your time and your involvement, and then you have no time for true intimacy with Jesus. And so what happened was that there was no force being generated. And so then, because there was momentum, it became a slow die, a slow kill. But over the period of time where the church has even lost its momentum, they have figured out how to, what I call, play church.
Manipulate.
Sure. And it is to, instead of compare, to figure out where you are in your life with the requirements and expectations and desires of God, which are found in His Word. I feel that sometimes, in fact, a lot of times, we compare ourselves to other people instead of the requirements of God's words. We're looking around saying, "Oh my God, I'm way holier than they are."
Well, in 2 Corinthians 10:12, or is it 2? 2 Corinthians 10 says, those who compare themselves amongst themselves are not wise. So for you to compare yourself to me, or me to compare yourself to you, just using us as that example, that's the opposite of what we should be striving for. My contention is that of the over 7 billion people on this planet, all throughout history, God has purposely spoken and made each and every person different. Different goals, different proclivities, different preferences. There's some people, for some reason, I don't know why, love the Beatles. And then there's some people like me who are correct and prefer the Rolling Stones. I can't tell you why that is. I don't know. I'm sure there's a scientific algorithm that you can figure that out. But the larger point being is, I think what you're getting to is the idea that, I would word it this way, eternity goes both ways. Smoking or not smoking. And just as, and I can say this because I know we talk almost every day. There is a genuine, concerted effort on both of our behalves to hear what God is telling us to give to people who are listening and people who are sharing. And we value and love that, and that's why we do what we do.
Yeah.
On the other hand of that, though, so if we're using the example of what we're doing as like properly plugging the computer into that light socket, there are people on the other side of that coin who are careless and just not, maybe they are purposeful, maybe they aren't careless, maybe they're doing things on purpose, but they're taking the ends of the bobby pin or the prongs of a fork or whatever and sticking it into that electrical socket because that's their compulsion, that's their proclivity. There are people that have been given over to the whims of evil.
That's what I wanted to ask you. That's a perfect time for me to shut up after I say this, because I know that you can speak better to what I'm getting ready to ask you. And I want to set this up. I want to put this on a tee for you.
Okay.
I've established that the forces of good are generated and they are real, even displayed by the Newtonian definition and the way that forces work. I took the good and showed how we can gain force by interacting in intimacy with Jesus. But I said earlier that I sense in my spirit and I sense all around me, even though I can't see it, I now understand deeply non-contact force, meaning that I don't have to physically touch it to know that there's a force there. I feel it in my spirit. And what I want you to speak to, because you're just better informed, is this: that in the same way Christians generate good, which would be the battle that I want to be involved in, the good side, we do that. On the flip coin, there is evil. And the people that establish the force of evil, the movement of evil, the energy of evil, they are establishing that because they are having direct contact and direct involvement, because it has to have two objects, with the generating force of evil that we know is Satan and Lucifer. And so I would like you, just on what you know and have studied, to talk about what we have talked about before, which is blatant Satan worship, blatant occultic and cultic worshiping and establishing principles, and the forces of evil, and a lot of these, or some of these evil people that have publicly acknowledged that they are interacting and dabbling with and relying on the evil forces of Satan.
Wow. Where do I start with that? Well, you're certainly correct. Much, and this is something as a side note. I think people that are decent and that people that do strive to be good and moral and ethical and upright in our culture, I believe they genuinely have a hard time grasping and believing and applying what I'm about to say. That just as there are those people like you and I and them who are a force for good in this world, if I may, there are also, and that's a willful decision. That's a willful choice, right? Not that we aren't tempted or that we always hit the ball out of the park, but it's a willful choice to stay steadfast and to be on that path. There are people who are steadfast and stay on the path of serving the Dark Lord Lucifer, if you will.
Publicly stating that.
Yes. And it's hard for people that are good, that are surrounded by good, that are raised in a country of like this, to believe that there are people who have genuinely evil intentions. And it genuinely is. And
maybe you could speak specifically more to using an example of the evil that was unleashed on the world and refer to Hitler. Sure. And what you happen to know about the practices that him and the SS and those closest to him had to partake in with him, and you could speak to that.
Yeah,
because it's public. It's public knowledge.
So, when you talk about Hitler, you talk about the SS, you talk about the Third Reich. The word Reich actually means realm. The third realm. Okay, so as we're talking in accessing the natural and the supernatural, Hitler's entire, and this is mainline history. This isn't my weird Bill.
Yeah, it's not misinformation.
Yes,
just to put it out there.
His whole thing was tapping into interdimensional forces. And please listen, because I know I have people that have said this to me before. I don't believe in alien. I don't believe in little green dudes with big heads and big foggy eyes. E.T. did not tell Elliot to phone home except in a Steven Spielberg movie. I do not personally believe in UFOs. What I believe is interdimensional entities, interdimensional beings that have free access from their realm to our realm. And whether those are angelic, loving messengers sent from the Almighty, or they are demonic, evil, demented forces on assignment from the evil one. They are real, and they do interact in the affairs of humans. One of the big things that that Hitler, through in the Third Reich, the SS tried to access, and they employed so many different things, whether it be blood sacrifice rituals, orgies, blood orgies, black masses, whether it be incantations, chanting, employing systems of belief in regards to heathenistical rituals throughout Egypt, parts of Africa, South America, Druidic practices from the Celtic. And I know this is real heavy stuff, but this is true. I'm going to give you a really great example. And we've talked about Hollywood. The whole idea of Hitler pursuing the Ark of the Covenant in regards to Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, or pursuing the chalice that Christ drank from in The Last Crusade. Those are what's called MacGuffins. Those are just plot devices. But there is history. There is facts where ancient, whether it be Druidic, heathenistical artifacts throughout the world in regards to different quote-unquote priest class or priesthoods, that these rituals were duplicated and followed to a T. They would send out specialists, if you will, historians, their quote-unquote priest class, which is primarily what the Third Reich was, throughout the world to find people who were experts in those heathenistical practices to evoke and invoke these interdimensional entities, these interdimensional beings, to give them whatever power, to give them whatever sway or influence that they wanted or needed. And I'm trying to put this in a way that won't be so distasteful or so unbelievable, because once you start to read history, one thing thing you understand, and this is probably the number one indicator to point that Hitler was fueled by a bloodlust that is only given to somebody upon their throwing themselves in with the devil. And that's not hyperbole. There's a bloodlust that throughout history, whether it be the Babylonians, whether it be the Egyptians, whomever, have sought to eliminate God's people, the Jewish people. That's just a fact. That's a biblical fact, but it's also a mainline history fact, historical fact.
And it rises up periodically, too,
Yes.
with the rise of a leader like him,
Yes.
who, when they turn themselves over, not just for the power to achieve the destruction, but the idea, like the desire to go after them, the thought to go after them, right?
Yes.
The effort in all of the origin comes from where? It's what I'm talking to you about with that evil.
Yes. No, you're exactly right. Just to answer your question as simply as I can, it is not a normal human instinct to annihilate people. I'm going to give you two examples. One, we're talking about Hitler. The instinct to annihilate the Jews, actually the word genocide was created specifically after World War II because that is what happened. The absolute attempt to eradicate the Jewish people off the face of the planet. That's evil. That's heinous. There is nothing with any kind of quote-unquote good, kind, loving, quote-unquote faith system that would perpetrate that kind of action.
Correct. Or desire.
Yes. The other example I'm going to give you, and this is going to be one of the ouchie moments of this, is the absolute genocide since 1974 of aborted fetuses throughout America alone. Which now we come to discover, if you do a little digging, that the Roe versus Wade thing was an absolute hoax. It was theater, but that's another thing. Christ mentions in regards to children, so let's just put this in perspective before I go any further. The Jewish people, the nation of Israel, is God's chosen people. They are, as it says in Scripture, the apple of his eye. God loves and cherishes and protects the innocent in our culture, which are children. There is a succinct, ungodly, unholy desire to take a life, have it sacrificed on the altar of Moloch, or the altar of convenience, or the altar of contemporary society. That blood, to kind of tie back, not to get into specific with Hitler, but it was a thing, blood sacrifices. Mm-hmm. This is and now even the Church of Satan has billboards that's getting into the thing that all abortions are now claiming, which is something we've known for years, is a public sacrifice to the devil. What has happened is, Christ even said, it's better for you to tie a millstone or a heavy stone around your neck and be thrown into the depths of the ocean than to harm an innocent child. And even with the rise of pedophiles and like the normalization of adult and child, quote unquote, love, it's filthy, sick, disgusting, vile garbage.
But it is all interaction.
Yes.
Between two objects. And that force that's being generated, because make no mistake, if there is an interaction between two objects, there is a force. The force that's being generated by that is the establishing of the evilness that I feel and that I sense within my spirit. It's a real thing. It's an at a distance force because I am not involved in that, but that is around me and I sense that. And that was
it's come to such a crescendo. I would say like this, neither of us were alive back then, but I would say it's come to such a crescendo that people had to unify under the banner of, if I can say this, under the banner of goodness, under the banner of holiness. The world had to unify to stop this genocide of the Jews in the 40s. It is now coming to a crescendo, and I don't know. I'm personally persuaded that there is no backpedaling. Like, we've crossed the Rubicon. We're getting ready to go over the waterfall. We can't backstroke far enough, fast enough to stop this. That the blood of the innocent have been sacrificed on these altars that I don't know that there's a way to rectify that. Mm-hmm. If there is, it escapes me. So the forces of evil that you're talking about, I would say much like the time of Hitler, and there's been other people that have killed like Mao Zedong, they claim with 65 to 100 million people conservatively in the 50s and 60s as he was the leader of China, which he was installed by the CIA, which now we have Mao Zedong, which I'm sure we're going to get banned on YouTube for that one. But nonetheless, there is a succinct history of evil. You can follow its roots back to the garden. I think that what you're feeling, Carl, is that crescendo that we have normalized, we've accepted, we've welcomed, and we have dotted on those who are engaging and perpetrating this heinousness against the most innocent and the most pure in our society. I believe that's what you're feeling, and it's starting to manifest itself in ways where, like, you're riding down the street, and I see this in people. You're literally driving down the street and just anger comes over you. And I'll say this. I would just want to say this. I'm speaking of myself. We can't give into that anger. We fight with love. Yeah. That anger, that compulsion to, to rip someone's head off in traffic when they cut you off, I think that's just an overflow of what we're talking about. How we have to combat that is through love. And once again, I'm speaking to myself because I wear my shirt that says I hate people, but we need to combat this with love. And that, I think that's a good place to end it. Yeah, I think that's a good place to end it. Did you have anything you want to add? Or?
No, I just wanted to, again, brief conclusion that forces are real. They exist with contact and at a distance. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean the effects are not there. I want to develop more intimacy and more interaction with the source of my force, and that's God. And I would just hope that people would choose to do that and fight the people that choose to interact and generate their force by blatantly and willingly involving themselves in devilish, satanic, Luciferian desires. And that's where they come from.
Absolutely. I would just to piggyback, weapons of our warfare are not carnal. They're mighty through God for the pulling down of strongholds and wickedness in spiritual high places. Because we don't wrestle with, like, not to get it twisted, Carl's not saying don't go out and kneecap somebody that does that. Mm-hmm. What I believe, if I may speak for you, I believe you're saying in love, be prayerful, be consistent, show that person cutting you off, okay, bless them, God, or whatever that is. Don't react in the spirit of that evil, which is what it wants, and it grows stronger. Respond in love, respond in the manner that Christ would, and not this American gospel BS motivational speaker. Jesus was a hippie, but like in the true sense of Christ. So that being said, thanks for listening. As always, please share, subscribe, leave a 5-star comment wherever you can listen to podcasts. Flawedcast CLE. We're on Apple, Google Play, Spotify, Breaker. I think we're definitely on Rumble, on Flawed Inc. We might be on YouTube, Flawed Inc. You can find us on the Project Mockingbird social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Check us out on Gab. Check us out on Getter. We're on Parler, on Flawed Inc. Copy my book. The link is below. Get it. Need it. That being said, we look forward to sojourning with you next week.